Tony Edward just posted this yesterday. Significant probable PTSD rates in the autism community. A wake-up call for understanding and support. In recent years, researchers have been delving into the complex relationship between autism and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, unearthing important insights that shed light on how autistic individuals experience trauma and its aftermath. A recent study published in the Autism Research journal has revealed intriguing findings that highlight the prevalence of PTSD among autistic adults, their unique interpretations of traumatic events, and the crucial role of trauma assessment. I've been saying this for years, and that goddamn autism expert that diagnosed me, the psychologist, she right out refused to acknowledge my trauma history. She completely ignored it, just dismissed it. She literally turned away. That was her body language. That was in 2020. Yeah. And I am still furious about it. Again, invalidation. She literally told me to my face. She is the expert, not me. Hell no, I am the expert on my experience. And I for sure was traumatized several times. Childhood, school, relationship, in the cult, and at work. All of that. And nobody gaslights me on that, and nobody will tell me that this is not trauma because I see the symptoms. And luckily, I have investigated the nervous system-based trauma approach, the neurobiology. I have looked into that before I have investigated autism, and I am so glad I did it because then I had the background. Because if you buy into this pathologizing fucking autism narrative and do not know how trauma actually looks like, the fight, flight, freeze, appease responses. Go look at the animal kingdom, what they do in the wild, how they react, and then compare that with reactions to stress in the autistic community. You see it right away. This is trauma. This is stress, survival responses. Yeah, but then just pathologize it and label it as autistic behavior. Fucking hell. Anyway, the study's compelling findings delve deep into the prevalence of probable post-traumatic stress injury. It's not a disorder, it's an injury among autistic individuals. The statistics speak volumes. DSM-5 traumatic events, when exposed to events that meet the criteria outlined in the DSM-5, autistic adults showed a 45% rate of probable current PTSD and a staggering 61 lifetime rate. This emphasizes the lasting impact of traumatic events on their mental well-being. 2. Non-DSM-5 traumatic events. The numbers remain strikingly high even when considering events that do not meet the DSM-5 criteria, and that's the point. There is so much that is traumatizing that isn't in the DSM-5 criteria. Following such events, the rate of probable current PTSD was 43% and the lifetime rate was 63%. These numbers shed light on the broad spectrum of experiences that can trigger PTSD symptoms. 3. Across all trauma types, an overall view reveals that a significant 47% of autistic individuals experience probable current PTSD across all trauma types. Moreover, a substantial 64% had a lifetime rate of probable PTSD. These statistics underscore the urgent need for tailored assessment and support strategies within the autistic community. A deeper dive into studies' implications. Expanding upon this topic, our clinical experiences find resonance in the findings of this paper, leading us to highlight several key themes we aim to address. High rates of PTSD and autism, an unveiling reality. It's just common sense. We live in a society that is not made for us. It's too loud, it's too busy, and well, all the invalidation, don't be so sensitive and all that, right? And then all the noise you are exposed to, the chaos at school, really that. And if you don't fit in, then This heightened vulnerability is attributed to a range of factors inherent to autism traits, including sensory sensitivities and differences in cognition, communication, and social interactions, broadening the spectrum of trauma interpretations. Yes, it's so necessary. I said that so many times. Should be separate from the PTSD description. Traditionally, PTSD has been linked to specific traumatic events that meet certain criteria outlined in the DSM-5. However, the study confirmed what we know from our clinical practice. Autistic individuals interpret trauma more broadly. They may experience traumatic responses to a diverse range of events that extend beyond the conventional DSM-5 criteria, which is way too narrow. These events encompass not only the expected traumatic experiences, but also events specific to the challenges and unique life experiences that come with being autistic. It's just common sense. The importance of trauma assessment in autism. The study underscores the necessity of tailored trauma assessment for autistic individuals. The distinct interpretations of traumatic events within the autistic population emphasize the need for assessment tools that consider their subjective experience. One-size-fits-all approaches to trauma assessment might overlook crucial signs of PTSD in this group. To provide effective support and interventions, clinicians and mental health professionals should be equipped with assessment tools that account for the diverse ways trauma can impact autistic individuals. I've been saying that for years. Finally, they catch up. And here you can just read through the comments. I have CPTSD from being bullied and abused at school. I would say to professionals that just because a person doesn't meet all the criteria for PTSD doesn't mean to say that they do not have it. I can give an example of a psychologist saying that people typically get angry, but that isn't as sure as night follows day. I find watching basketball as triggering because I remember when I was in year 9, a bully at school who was short in stature had a basketball, and I don't know where he got it from, but he was bouncing it on my head. Oh boy. I told him to get lost, and he seemed to delight in that. I also hate if people appear from around corners because I remember very clearly a day at school where he and another bully ganged up, and I had been walking beside a teacher, and when that teacher went into the library, one of them appeared from behind the bag racks and one from behind the wall, and they harassed and stalked me all lunchtime. The same bully who was bouncing a ball on my head said that it was the bully's first day back and he had to get a bit of the action. I often find the word action triggering. I became quite ill that year, not surprising, and my mother kept forcing me to go to school. What I needed was someone to stand up for me and say that I needed to be removed from school and be homeschooled. Another comment. I grew up thinking PTSD applied to war veterans only, as my maternal grandfather had been in the Battle of the Somme. He would react to planes flying above my grandparents' home, I recall, during the 70s. Their house was above a flight path to the airport in Aberdeen, plus their streets had been bombed during World War II and neighbors killed, sadly. And he had been injured physically too, for the rest of his life. He had terrible PTSD that was not even recognized back then for war veterans, but despite this he taught me social etiquette via our little tea parties together as a preschooler with my teddies at the dining room table. He was such a lovely, gentle, kind person and a great role model. I'm forever grateful to his love and kindness he showed me as a young child. My list of traumas since childhood is too long to list here, but I know I have had PTSD at points in my life and not aware of what it was until many years later upon reading its symptoms. My now late husband was neurotypical and a clinical psychologist, and he told me many years ago that I had cushioned my lifelong traumas due to my Asperger's. Anyway, I've been told I am a strong person and get on with life despite the odds that are stacked against me at times. I tend to flush negative people out of my life as I've got older and just focus on my creativity, etc. I'm lucky to find good people too in my life and hold on to them dearly. So pleased this is being talked about and investigated. PTSD is a huge issue for the autistic community, absolutely huge and overlooked. My son had a traumatic hospital stay 6 years ago that triggered anxiety and challenging behaviors that have never gone away. Also, lockdown has triggered all sorts of problems. Professionals look at me baffled when I mention this. It needs to be taken seriously. Another comment. I'm glad this is being looked into, as it's so simple in the case of late diagnosis autistics often goes. The trauma they have suffered at not being understood and supported can easily become complex PTSD. Can you imagine what it is like to be called out for not listening or understanding in a class by the teacher in front of everyone? Bullied daily by your peers. A normal day-to-day occurrence for many neurodivergent children who have not been diagnosed. The list is endless. This sort of daily trauma will inevitably cause shutdown and eventually a full breakdown and long-term health issues. Yeah, absolutely. Tony Edwards replied to this, absolutely, your insights hit the nail on the head. Late diagnosis, particularly in girls, can often mean years of misunderstanding and lack of support, leading to complex trauma that lingers. The scenarios you mentioned, like being called out in class or facing daily bullying, can indeed take an immense toll. These experiences, accumulated over time, can severely impact an individual's mental and even physical well-being. Your comment highlights a crucial aspect of the journey many late diagnosed individuals go through, and appreciate you shedding light on it. Thank you for sharing. Another comment. I was punished repeatedly for not making eye contact, often caned and belittled by teachers and my own father. You make a good point here. Autism Support Community answers. I was terrified of the cane at school. I was belittled by some teachers, but most of the time the teachers were good. I will never forget my home economics teacher, who, when I was in year 8 and a bully used to steal my school bag, allowed me to bring my bag into class, even though that was a privilege for year 12. I did experience some unfair punishments, like when a bully pushed me to the point of meltdown, and when I was constantly harassed by a kid in year 9 science, and the teacher put me on detention. I stood up to the teacher by being late for detention. Some of my teachers were truly vile and should never have been allowed to teach or near children. We had nice ones too, but the trauma from the horrible ones leaves an impact. Thankfully, I've been able to move on more knowing they are dead and can no longer teach. We had the belt in both primary and secondary school here in the UK. It scared the living daylights out of me. I think one teacher in secondary school carried a cane under his arm and tucked it deeply into his black gown. Thankfully, I never had it happen to me, but I had huge anxiety in school and licked around my mouth so much in primary school that it became chaffed and red and needed Germaline applied. I have seen autistic girls a few years ago from the meetups with same thing and mentioned it to their moms and told them it is anxiety. They had it intervened a lot quicker than I did. Mine continued all the way through primary and also into summer holidays and going on holiday to noisy, unpredictable places, and due to things going on at home too. I meet so many autistic people who have been traumatized, many of them late diagnosed, like myself. I was never diagnosed with PTSD, but would have been in more modern times. Undoubtedly, in my case, my trauma became deep-seated and impacted on most of my life. I had no way to convey my pain and problems as being situationally mute meant that all was locked in. That was the same for me at school. Late diagnosis allowed me to address many issues that I never knew existed. Only when I started writing my autobiography did I realize that it was bullying and an abusive father who caused most damage. I feel that our ability to ruminate, sensitive nature, and likelihood of crippling anxiety and depression all conspire to exacerbate said trauma. I remember the endless possibilities of threats did more damage than physical attack. Also the degree of isolation we experience, often rejection from our peers, and then so often to be dismissed, blamed, or simply not believed. That's the worst of all. That's exactly the point. And then you feel so alone. We are thrown into the deep end of society without a life vest. Then people are surprised when we can't swim. Interestingly, it was my trauma that was used against me to block and delay my late diagnosis. The suggestion that I was just traumatized and not autistic. However, after my diagnosis, my whole life and mindset changed. I finally had the tools to dismantle my trauma and move on. I'm pleased to say that the trauma that once consumed me no longer controls me. My trauma works for me now in my work and public talks. Tony Atwood responds to that. Your comment really struck a chord. Thank you for sharing your personal journey. It's truly inspiring to hear how, despite the challenges you faced, you found a way to turn your trauma into strength. The points you make about sensitivity, rumination, and the weight of anxiety and depression amplifying the impact of trauma would be validating for others to hear. Your transformation from being controlled by trauma to using it as a tool for growth and change is remarkable. It's wonderful to see all that you do. You're making a powerful impact. As I always say, make sure you are practicing self-care for yourself. So this is just one study, ketamine and chronic PTSD symptoms. Repeated ketamine infusions reduces symptoms. And there's another Ketamine, a promising novel therapy for anxiety and PTSD. Another case worth considering is that of Aaron Paul Orsini, an autistic author, educator, and researcher who was saved from anxiety, depression, and suicidality following the intentional use of psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, and ketamine in his late 20s. Orsini has written extensively about his experiences and ongoing research, publishing 3 books on the subject: Autism on Acid 2019, Autistic Psychedelic 2021, and Introduction to Psychedelic Autism 2022. He estimates that he has communicated with over 5,000 autistic individuals who have written or attended his Autistic Psychedelic peer support group. Like many autistic individuals, he had been treated with multiple psychotropic medications, SSRIs, I think, was admitted to inpatient care several times, and had suicide attempts. He chronically suffered from decreased social functioning, repetitive behavior, sensory hypersensitivity, anxiety, low mood, anhedonia, lack of energy, and suicidality. Despite intensive treatment with therapy and medications, he remained challenged by his condition and environmental circumstances and could not return to work. After taking ketamine, he reported that his depressive and suicidal challenges had disappeared, and his autism-related complaints had diminished. This case, together with previous clinical research, suggests that ketamine is likely to be effective against depression and suicidality, and that ketamine is potentially effective for mitigating challenges associated with being autistic, and therefore also good for trauma healing. There are also studies about that. Psychedelics have been used in autism. However, little work has directly investigated the role of ketamine in improving quality of life for autistic individuals or enhancing their ability to more harmoniously engage in various social and intellectual contexts. About a dozen small studies conducted from the late 1950s to 1970s tested psychedelic compounds, mainly LSD and psilocybin, in autistic children and adolescents. To understand whether and how psychedelic compounds could potentially be used to improve the lives of autistic individuals, researchers must carefully delineate the underlying biology. Ketamine has the potential to help with the many challenges faced by autistic individuals. The drug has an excellent safety record and is regularly given to autistic children before surgery. One study gave intranasal ketamine to 21 patients with ASD and found no significant impact on clinical tests, but the ketamine was well tolerated. Most have never heard of ketamine, and even among those who have, few know it could be used for seriously impacting the rate of suicide. Ketamine is not the final answer in ending suicide, but it is one very significant tool we have that can change the course of a never-ending scourge. And we know that so many autistics are actually suicidal because their trauma has never been addressed. They are bombarded with sensory overload on a daily basis, and life is just too challenging. So, for many, suicide seems like the best solution, to just end it because it's too much. And quality of life seems to never improve.